Before we jump in, any other reflections from last time? Anything that was kind of percolating over the last week? Guess not.
Since I
Everybody's
missed
set to.
last time, I was kind of hoping something would be percolating, but that's,
Uh,
I was hoping something would be percolating, but I'm here. Nothing's
All right.
percolating.
Well, nothing's percolating. Okay.
Oh,
That was a whole
darn
week ago. That was a whole week ago. I can hardly remember yesterday.
You mean you can't remember yesterday?
Oh, yeah, that's right.
Yeah, there you go. All right, fine. Okay. So we're going to look at chapter 2. Um, what did you think of chapter 2?
Depressing.
I'll second
Why?
that.
It was everything that we read about every day. And yeah, it's depressing, but it's the way the world is right now.
Yeah,
Why is it depressing?
Why is it depressing?
Yeah.
Well, take the part about kids and everybody else and mental problems. I mean,
Uh-huh.
everybody I know who has teenagers, well, my 2 granddaughters, a number of friends' children are suffering from anxiety and depression, and it's really interfering with their life and their growing up. It's very prevalent.
And we
It
read
is.
too, all the time.
Yeah, and it's all about
And our kids
the
are the ones
internet.
we know are not the
social
only
media.
ones, because everybody's talking about it around the country too.
I mean, he nails it, but it's, you know,
Well, that's what I think was so good about that chapter, because he's saying it out loud. I think too many of us are, sort of trying to live by ignoring these things. And I really appreciated him saying all that.
Right. And Joyce, just to follow up on that, the chapter is not just a litany of all the pandemics. I mean, it is that, but it's more than that. On page 41 struck me. He says, as long as we have a competitive, antagonistic, self-centered way of interacting with each other, we will never be able to overcome any of these toxic, life-threatening pandemics. Okay, so that's the bad part. But the good part is continuing to read. And this, my friends, my readers, my fellow humans, brings me finally to my thesis, the ultimate purpose of this book. This is why we need a spiritual revolution. So let's say he's not just listing a bunch of woes, he's sort of telling us, okay, here's where we are, but he's proposing a way out.
Right.
Yeah, now all we need to hear is how. So I'm hoping in chapters 3 and beyond, we get some of the how to. Now that he's proposed the solution, let's hear the implementation.
All right. So the basic premise of the chapters again is to begin to hear Mark speak once for me. Yeah, you're going to need to sign back in. Yeah, we got you as the chipmunk again.
Mickey Mouse.
Yeah. I heard it in the background and I figured something was up. So he's talking about, first of all, he sort of focuses on young people, right? In a sort of way. But is it the young people who created this problem?
No.
no,
No. The young people are the symptom of the society that we've created.
yeah.
Yes. Definitely.
Correct? Okay. So the solution isn't necessarily to get the young people to stop doing what they're presently doing now. It's to fix us first. Right?
Yeah, and as I say, I think we need to be aware. We can't be just ignoring. Making
I mean,
believe.
so
Okay.
I think, Bill's point is, we can talk about the anxiety of young people who have seen a collapse of institutions and communities that usually people found support in. And so what they've done since because of our generations, we've destroyed those entities, they've turned to the internet and social media for their community. And in so doing, they are now suffering from greater anxiety because that community is not tangible. Okay. So, um, I think frequently people point out the dangers of social media. So, I mean, there's an article at least once a week in one of the major newspapers talking about the danger of social media. So it's not like we're unaware of the danger of social media, but what it frequently talks about is what's happening to young people. But there's usually no discussion about the reality that social media and the problems that we see in social media today are a byproduct of the society that we have created.
Yeah.
And that's something that he points out very obviously, that we're part of this problem. That's why we need a spiritual revolution. What's our value? Where are we getting meaning from? You know, what has been our role in the development of gender inequalities, racism, unequal social structures? What has been our role in the destruction of the communities that would weave fabric of community together? Because they didn't just disappear out of, we woke up one day and they were gone. It's been a gradual progression.
An evolution, not a revolution.
Yeah, yeah. We've devolved.
Okay.
So,
But if he's talking about, all right, you're laying out, it's been a long time, it's our it's our fault, right? And now we are where we are. But now he's calling for a revolution,
right.
change, not gradual change. So my point is, if it was evolutionary and we need to speed this all up, it can't be us that are responsible for the revolution. That it needs to be the younger generation that needs to be the root of this significant change, rapid
Do you
change.
think so?
That's
Yeah.
my premise.
No, I don't think
Okay.
Yeah, he doesn't say that. But just the two words, just the revolution, the spiritual revolution.
Larry,
Hmm.
I appreciate what you're saying, but I don't think it's the younger generation's responsibility. I think it's a combined responsibility. I think we have to be there egging people forward and be willing to march with them and give some direction. I agree with you that it's a lot is going to be on their feet, but it's sort of like abdicating our responsibility. Things kind of happened and they slipped through the cracks, in my opinion,
I go
like
with
we
you.
weren't paying enough attention.
Yeah, I agree. We're not abdicating, our responsibility in this.
Well, let's look at some of what he writes. So,
He's blaming the kid.
What?
if he sort of talks about the issue of if you point at the moon, that's not the moon. The moon's the moon.
Yep.
I think frequently what happens is we all point at different things and call it that. In other words, we would say, well, social media is the problem, or this is the problem, but we're not talking about the moon. You know, what's the moon that he would be referring to? I mean, what's the problem?
You've lost me.
What's the problem? Why is all this anxiety going on in our world? And it's not just the young people. One of the reasons why we see everybody going stone cold crazy these days is because everybody feels the anxiety.
Yeah, because it's not
Well,
getting any
isn't
better.
the basic tenet I like at the end? He's saying Jesus asked us to love thy neighbor as thyself, and then goes on with other religions basically saying the same thing.
Right,
And
but that's more.
have we forgotten that?
But that's part. That's not the issue of what he's pointing out. That which is missing.
Yeah, Todd, let
The
me read.
love
Because
is
you-
not missing. I think it is.
No, because loving the neighbor is one of the solutions. But how do you get there? In other words, you just don't wake up and love your neighbor. You have to have a spiritual revolution to do that. So what's missing that we can't love our neighbors?
Good.
That's what he's pointing at.
We're separated from everyone.
Well, one of the things that we're distanced, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
But what else are we distanced from?
God.
Or,
Our souls.
I mean, God's one way of describing it, but what are we missing from? What are we separate from?
Our soul.
There's a disconnect somewhere within us in terms of what gives meaning.
Yeah, yeah.
Right.
You know, so as a Christian, there's a real disconnect between us and Christ.
Mm-hmm.
You know, as a Buddhist, there would be a real disconnect between, you know, the person and their sense of meaning and who they are in the universe. You know, if you're Jewish, there's a separation between you and the Torah. If it's a Muslim, there's a separation between you and Allah. You know, so the question is, how do we get that back? You know, so for us as Christians, the emphasis is on how do we place Christ in our hearts and live that way in reality? Because if Christ isn't ruling in our hearts, we can never love our neighbor. That's unfortunately the reality.
But he does say there's a big difference between spirituality and religion.
Correct. And I'm not talking about religion.
Well, that's what I was just asking, you know, because now you're quoting all of these, you know, different faith traditions. I won't use the word religion, but you know, you're making examples of all of these different faith traditions, and that gets dangerously close to the line of religion and dogma and practice and all that.
It's about understanding what gives us the ultimate meaning.
Mm-hmm.
And all humans have a religion,
Mm-hmm.
even atheists. It's that which gives them meaning. I mean, that's what the word means.
And I think he's also saying that we're all suffering from this separation.
Right.
That's why he points out the other religions, because he's making it very universal.
Correct.
That we're all struggling.
In many regards, I mean, Larry's not wrong. In many regards, what he's saying is that we're worshiping religions instead of that which is the religion is supposed to offer to us, which is meaning.
Yeah, and Paul kind of said it too. I think he's also talking about the fact that we are so disconnected and satisfied with that. There's a line on page 30. He says, essentially, by healing the spiritual disease of otherness, as well as making broken systems more just and fair, we can eventually envision and create the big, diverse human family most of us long for. You know, so giving meaning certainly is part of understanding just how we're all connected and acting on it.
So, I mean, here's a chicken or the egg question. Can you create systems that are just and fair and equitable without transforming the individual?
I'd say no. No.
I think we've been trying to do that for centuries.
And
What's
it hasn't
that?
worked.
No. No, I don't think you can do that.
And this is the interesting conundrum that I mean, I'm going to point it out, Larry. Cover your ears. Evangelical Protestants say that you cannot change a system unless you change the individual. So that's why they always go for individual salvation, as opposed to addressing systemic needs, because they don't believe that you can change systems.
But who makes up
That you
systems?
first, right? But you first and foremost have to change the individual. So this has always been the chicken and the egg argument, that between evangelical church, and I'm not talking about right wing, extremists. I'm talking about evangelical Christians who believe that the onus is first and foremost, you have to save the individual. The individual has to be saved, and then they can re-engage society and build a more just society, as opposed to the more liberal forms, the progressive Christianity, which talks about if you fix the system, you can create more moral people.
Clearly, you have to work on both.
Yeah.
Yeah, but we live in a world where, again, part of the problem and part of what he's talking about is that we have this competitive, achievement-based, conflictual understanding of everything in the world, so that everything's at loggerheads. In order for me to be right, that means I have to have more power, as opposed to addressing what we're talking about, which is both. So in our separate attempts from the Christian perspective to get to a more just society, we're working at loggerheads and creating the worst possible outcome. Which is, again, emphasizes his need. There needs to be a spiritual revolution.
Yeah, I get that. I understand what you're saying. I think, we can sit around forever waiting for systems for people to change, and the systems never do. So I tend to agree with the statement that if you can create a just and equal system, that you'll create, more moral people. Although it's a funny relation, because I think it's a moral. Many of the things that you're working on systemically are ones that are based on a certain moral principle or moral ethic or practice.
Are they?
So there's this funny, it's a funny kind of catch-22 situation. Change the system and you create moral people, but moral people have to help create the change, create enough of a desire to want to change the system too.
I think we have been changing the system. Growing up, it was a white man's world. I mean, being a girl was a tough situation. That's changed tremendously. It's still a white man's world, but the color and the ethnic groups are making headway. Women certainly are. Give us another 20 years and we'll run the country.
I hope
which
so.
I don't know will be an improvement, but we have come a long way. We have been making changes.
So let me ask the question, why is there so much anxiety over these issues now then?
Because everything is so fluid now. There's no concrete answers. We can't give our youngest an absolute answer to anything.
Where does the human condition of humanity come in?
In terms of?
in terms of depravity.
Huh.
Well, that takes us into a theological conversation, and I'm not sure if we're trying to address things on Wilson's level. I think he would probably say that depravity resides in the fact that we are so alienated from understanding meaning in our lives that it causes us to do other things.
Well,
I think it's interesting what Pat is saying, like you're talking about progress, Pat. But interestingly enough, it's like we're not seeing it. We're not really feeling it. I mean, what it's not wrong what you said, but somehow it's not working.
and it also feels more dire to me.
Yeah.
Um,
Well,
Yeah.
in a sense, Pat, and I totally agree with what you're saying. There's a difference between progress and how one is feeling, which to me is interesting. Why is there so much more mental depression and anxiety and feeling of loneliness? And yet we have made progress. We have made what we'd call progress. And I find that a huge dilemma.
It
The-
is.
A huge dilemma.
I think we have made progress. I certainly have seen it myself as a woman in science. However, I feel stymied because I would hope that there would have been more progress.
Expectations.
It didn't meet expectations. The other thing is, so many kids go online and see things they don't have, things they're not doing and they want to do. And that causes angst.
Yeah, we all do that. I mean, that's
Yeah, we do. But so much
I mean-
so with the kids, it seems.
Well,
I'm of all
I-
kids, I mean, like up through their 30s, so that's young adults too.
So many
I mean,
ways.
it's called keeping up with the Joneses. I mean, it's just
It is.
It's
And
just
it's worse
easier
now.
to see.
It's
Correct.
Or think of
Yeah,
it
it's
in
worse
an
now.
international, think of it in an international sense, that whole countries see what's going on in countries that have wealth, and they want a piece of that action, and yet they're being oppressed and they're being held back. It creates a desire. So
But in our country, it's not just about stuff. What the kids, at least the kids that I know are seeing, is all the things that have gone wrong that, we and our generation and the generations before have done that have messed everything up. And there's a huge amount of anxiety about the destruction of the earth. And there's a huge amount of anxiety about the injustices that are prevalent throughout the world. And it's not just about having the latest stuff or, new sneakers or whatever. It's
But why is it so much worse? Because I had the same issues when I was younger.
yeah, but you didn't have the internet. You didn't have TikTok.
What's that got to do with it?
It has a lot to do with it.
No, seriously, what does that have to do with it? I had the same. I thought that the generations before me screwed up everything. I knew there was an environmental crisis, but my anxiety wasn't through the roof. I sat through and had to watch the day after, because that's what everybody watched about nuclear holocaust. But my anxiety is not like it is today. So why is it that
How
much
many
more?
hours a day did you spend on your phone?
Why is the anxiety that much higher, not just amongst young people, but everybody? We keep forgetting that everybody is at angst levels, not just the younger generations on TikTok.
Right.
I think, Todd, that some of it has to do with the speed at which everything is being thrown at people.
Okay.
we see so much, not only what we don't have, but we see the violence across the world. We see the destruction of the earth because everything comes, all of the major storms and all of that. We see all of that every second, and if we don't see it every second, we hear about it, and everybody in the world hears about it. And I think in a way, some people feel much closer to everybody in the world because they're visibly closer to them. And
Also see,
they all feel, sorry.
sorry, go ahead, Dana.
Oh, and I think that causes, the fighting in some other country could be the fighting in our country very soon. The anger and the dissonance is almost contagious. And it's contagious, I think, because it can travel so fast.
I
Let me go.
that what we see, the way we see our government working and the way we see our leaders behaving toward each other, we don't have anything to we don't have any good examples.
Let me go back to something Pat said, that we don't have any solid things to refer back to. We don't have concrete answers. What in terms of what Rainn Wilson's trying to say would be our concrete answer?
Here's your whole list of them. If we did this, if we did that, if we did the other thing, if we did any of those, it would be a concrete answer. At least it would be a start. But
what would be his start?
He says, if the most important of these ifs is if, as a part of a spiritual resolution, we work together to live in a modest harmony alongside a natural world with a right-sized economic growth. So I have to assume that that's his starting point.
So let's boil that down. What does that mean?
Utopia.
Well, that you could say utopia, but let's use a real term that people won't go, well, that's utopia. That'll never happen. What's another way of putting it?
I think we have a more equal distribution of goods and services, but we also have an attitude change, which I think is very difficult. And we've all talked about it before, and that's the desire for more.
So what does that mean?
Things.
So what does that mean we need to be?
We need to be less acquisitive, meaning acquiring less.
Or
we need to be more satisfied.
We need to be content with what we have.
Yeah.
And we really need to be willing to help others that don't have as much as we do.
And how do you become content with what you have?
Lower your expectations.
Or
be thankful.
Enjoy what you have.
Yeah.
Right.
Share what you have.
Give it away.
Well, I mean, it doesn't mean you have to be a pauper and be austere. It just means if you're living a life in which, as he points out in the first chapter, if you bend like a reed in the wind because you are planted firmly in something, you don't worry about the other stuff that's going on around you. You just remain faithful. Because he talks about the whole spiritual journey is that need to be planted in something, whatever it might be, that which gives you foundation and root. And it's that, when he talks about being able to be kind of content in the world and allow other people to have what they have and to help other people gain and to be at one with the universe and our nature and our surrounding, it's part of that being grounded in something that gives us our foundation, whatever that might be. Anybody feel that way?
Well, sometimes, occasionally.
Uh-huh.
I mean, but think about how difficult it is for us to be honest with with these questions, um, who supposedly have a community to reside in and have a faith to fall back on, and as opposed to somebody who doesn't have any of that.
Yeah.
I mean, I think we struggle with this as much as anybody.
Yeah, there's a little paragraph on 27 where he kind of talks about they referring to young people, and I'm feeling like I want to put we in. It says, instead of they, we seem to be lacking in the tools, skills, and ability to find solutions to these difficult issues. We to befriend, to bond, to connect, to self-soothe, to find joy, to create community. We are seemingly cut off from what nourishes us, suffering from diseases of despair and oftentimes feeling there's no way out. I feel like it's not just them, it's us too.
Well, what if I think contemporarily, we have so many people in this country, not even talking about other people, who can't even begin to think of contentment because they don't have enough food to eat. So we have things that we could fix if we wanted to. We could make it so that people are not hungry in our neighborhoods. We could make it so, I mean, we have the ability, but we haven't the will. We could make it so that their people aren't homeless or at risk of being homeless every second. And that's the thing. I don't know how we get a collective will to do that.
Mm-hmm.
Well, it's a good thing Gladwin has a new grocery store.
They do? Oh, nice.
I mean, why are we living in a system where people flock to this new store, but there's not cheap, affordable foods everywhere since there's enough food?
Mm-hmm.
Right.
That's an old question. And
Yeah.
depending on communities and organizations, and we send money. And if we're able, we are part of the people who are collecting and donating and giving. It's not that that's ignored. It's just, it's not lifted up particularly, but it's certainly not ignored. We can't solve it. 8 people own more than 50% of the rest of the world.
Yeah, that line's pretty.
Yeah.
Yeah, he says here on 36, we need to shift our view of true success away from accumulation of wealth and toward nobility, selflessness, and generosity.
And there are people like Bill Gates and
Elon Musk.
Warren Buffett that have pledged to do that.
That Elon.
No.
But it's kind of easy to pledge to do that when you have billions and billions.
Yeah, right, exactly.
But
we can
it
pledge
is
to
something
do
that,
it.
pardon?
We're still doing it. We don't have billions, but we manage to provide for other people. Todd brings us places where there's a need, and we can help with that. And we're not the only ones. There's churches and synagogues everywhere doing this. With fewer people, I might add.
And I agree with you.
Go ahead.
I agree with you. I think there's a lot of good that's happening, and a lot of people are saying, let's do this. I think there are a lot of people who aren't, and maybe it's how we get more people being willing to step up in different ways.
Go ahead, Rob.
Yeah, a couple of things. I think, small things that we can do can help. And, with taking food to the various organizations that are helping people. But I think, too, when he points the finger at the 8 wealthiest people and everything, and yet we as individuals support professional athletics teams. We support the movie industry and everything else, where people are making tens of millions of dollars a year, and we're supporting it. Maybe we should not. That is part of the wealth disparity is coming from things like that too.
Mm.
All right, so we're pointing the fingers elsewhere. Where should we be first pointing the fingers?
At us.
At ourselves.
Exactly.
Right.
What spiritual revolution do we need to undergo?
So you're gonna
Do we
start
feel
with-
anxious?
So you're gonna start with the person, not the system.
I'm going to start with what I have in front of me.
Yeah, there's only
Uh-oh.
only one thing you can control.
Yep.
Yeah, I mean, we can spend a lot of time pointing at everybody else because that's fun. I love people watching as much as anybody. It's the only reason I like going to the shore. But here's the reality. We need a spiritual revolution, and unless it starts with ourselves, how do we anticipate that it's going to start anywhere? And truth be told, don't you all feel anxious?
Sure.
Aren't you all a little bit angry with how things are going?
Sure.
Wouldn't you like to see a better society?
Mm-hmm.
Wouldn't you like to have a deeper relationship with whatever the divine is in your life?
Yes.
Yes.
So then we have to start with ourselves first, right?
Yeah. Says his line is the solution to the global pandemics that face us as a species don't lie in halls of government, but in every human heart and soul.
Yeah.
Right. That doesn't mean that you don't, we're not active in the world, but we first have to be comfortable with who we are because we don't want to live in an anxious existence. We don't want to be, as he pointed out in the first chapter, people who get so worked up because somebody else offers an opinion that they don't like. And all of a sudden we're angry at everybody in the world instead of just, okay, that's their opinion, move on. We get caught up in that cycle of hate. We watch our own news programs that castigate the other and then blame the other side for doing the same thing. So we first and foremost have to come to an understanding ourselves. So I think, it's wonderful that he pointed out everything that's like wrong in our society. And we can point a lot of fingers about what's wrong and where the injustices are. But it comes back to, for him, it comes back to us as individuals for seeking our own spiritual revolution.
Mm-hmm.
Well, that's why he's written that book, the book. I mean, he's writing it to us. So each person picks it up and reads it.
I don't think a lot of people will get past the second chapter.
Well,
That's
when
why
you
we
look-
have a problem.
when you look at this line here, we desperately need a revolution and transform how we approach, consider, and ultimately address everything. That's in italics. We humans do on planet Earth.
So if it's an
it-
inside job, how's that gonna change things? Unless I then make it an outside. Unless it comes from the inside and goes outside and goes into the world and there's action involved, there's a change in behaviors, there's, because I'd love to have a better divine sense of presence in my life. And then I could be perfectly happy. I'd be in nirvana. And who cares about everybody else?
Is that what he calls for?
No, that's what you were just saying.
That's
It's an individual spiritual relationship. Well, that's not gonna change anything. It's all it's gonna change me.
It has to start there. What is it? Be the change you want to see in the world?
Right. Then you got to do
Right.
something about it. You still have to put it into action.
but I don't think we're there yet to be able to put it into action.
But Larry, he does say what you're saying. Remember when he talks in chapter 1 about Kung Fu and Star Trek? Kung Fu is the internal thing,
Right.
internal spirituality, and Star Trek is the bigger, making the human species
Yeah.
family better.
Yeah.
I mean, so we endeavored to kind of look at this book for a couple of reasons. One, to see what this dude Dwight Schrute, who spent years on The Office, has to tell us about spirituality. The second is to better understand maybe what people are missing in the world, and how do we better relate with them. And if we want to do that, then shouldn't we also be reflecting upon what's going on in our lives? Because I don't think he's describing anything that is foreign to us. I think he's described our own present state perfectly. I know for myself the anxiety of, how the kids are going to be, the world that the kids are going to grow up in. What kind of opportunities are they going to have? Where is, the environmental, what's that going to be like in 20 years? What's the state of our nation going to be? All those things. But the point that we're looking at, and Larry's right, I think the point is, where do we get our strength and our understanding of meaning to then be able to share with other people a meaning that's not only important to them, but also beyond them? Because the whole premise is, if we want to bring an end to pandemics, there has to be a greater vision of meaning. And where do we derive our meaning from?
And how do we share that?
Well, what is the answer to that question? Well, how would you answer
sorry?
that? How would you answer that question?
Which one?
Where does your meaning come from? You.
For me?
Yeah.
My meaning comes from being a really sad, small person who is loved by something that I can't truly fathom, who's probably gotten me through many, many difficult times, and I'm blessed for it. And therefore, how can I help bless others in their difficult times as well?
Mm-hmm.
That's meaning for me.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And there are days I'm good at it, and there's days that honestly, I should probably be locked up in a cell and a key thrown away.
Mm-hmm.
I think one of the most important things that you just said, though, Todd, is about being us realizing the small person and the big God. I think we've got that all mixed up. And I think we need to remind ourselves of that a lot. I think just seeing yourself in relation to God in that way would be a huge help.
Well, he points out in the first chapter when he talks about, there's the smallness of the individual and the magnitude of everything that's around. And that sometimes you're right. We get that reversed.
Yeah. Yeah.
And at the same time, it's not about denigrating the individual, because
No,
that's not what it's about either. Okay, it's about lifting up the individual, but also understanding that there's a lot out there that's bigger than us.
Right.
Yeah, and Ginger's not here, but one of the things that she liked.
Of course, she's not. She's watching the Eagles game.
Yeah, so I'm not supposed to tell you, or you're not supposed to realize.
Yeah, like
Yeah,
I'm not
right.
supposed to know
That's
that.
pretty
Well,
obvious.
we've heard Ginger talk before.
Everybody's going to know
Yeah.
anyway. She just said, just tell him I'll be back next week.
Anybody who knows Ginger thinks she's not watching the Eagles game right now.
By the way, it's tied 3-3.
Thanks, Larry.
But this actually goes to the next chapter, but I guess it has some relevance. It's just a couple quotes. One is this one by Pierre Teilhard de Chardin. We are not human beings having a spiritual experience. We are spiritual beings having a human experience. That's really interesting to kind of think about that. And the true reality of human life is our soul's expedition. You don't have a soul. You are a soul. You have a body.
Right.
Some interesting things there. So I'm thinking of that in relation to meaning a little bit in terms of informing. It's maybe living life in a way where those things are really present to you. You know, you're not a human being having a spiritual experience. We are spiritual beings having a human experience.
I
I
love
think
that.
in many of the small groups, as we were meeting, one question I think I asked of most folks is, when did you feel most alive? And I think all the responses really derive from when a person, usually it's when a person felt like they were in touch with their meaning in the world.
Mhm.
It's that time when they were kind of in phase with that which gave them meaning in the world, and they felt most alive doing that. So it's not the same word as contentment, but it's that understanding of, this is who I am, this is who I'm supposed to be, and this is what I'm supposed to be doing in this moment. And it could be anything, but it's that time and place where everything seems to be lined up and in sync. And so I would wonder, as we're thinking about this chapter and all the anxieties that people are feeling, or all the fears or concerns that they might have, what helps us get through those things? For me, it's those moments that I can recall where everything seems to be in phase, in place, and I felt something that was larger than who I was, but it was also integral to who I was.
Mm-hmm.
And that is that which gives me strength to kind of say, okay, that situation over there or the situation right here, it's not great, but I'm going to get through this. We're going to get through this. Everything's going to be okay.
Mm-hmm.
And it's those sorts of things that we, I think, need to keep coming back to in our own daily spiritual whatever you do, is recalling those times, drawing strength and inspiration from them.
Mm-hmm.
When I wake up at 3 a.m. with the laundry list of things I haven't done or things I've got to do, and I can't fall back asleep because my anxiety is going through the roof after about an hour of thinking about all this stuff, it's then cycling back and remembering those times. And it puts my spirit, my soul at ease, and I can go back to sleep.
Mm-hmm.
And we need to practice that as individuals.
Mm-hmm.
And then, as Larry says, as we become more comfortable doing it ourselves, then how do we help others do that? How do we help others understand their place in the world? How they can derive meaning in who they are, what they do, how they can feel something greater than themselves.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the things that Rainn Wilson will talk about is that he doesn't tell us to turn away from our religious traditions. He says they all have the tools to help us in this endeavor.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So how do we use the tools that perhaps we've been taught, but maybe we don't implement, or maybe we're not using them in the right way?
Right.
To do this.
Or taking them so for granted that we don't think about sharing them.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Or thinking that, Pat, like, this always works for me. I'm sure it won't work for anybody else. Well, it might, if you've ever offered.
Yeah.
It's my old adage of my first day doing CPE. And people who at first didn't want anything to do with me would then say things like, "Would you pray for me?" And I say, "Sure." I'll put them on the list, and I walk out the room.
Mm-hmm.
No, stupid. They wanted you to pray with them right there.
Mhm. Yeah, I think, I think it's part of the next chapter. He'll talk about all the static that's in our lives that doesn't allow us to do those things that you're talking about. That would give us meaning, that allow us to make connection. It's trying to get rid of that static.
Mark, I just told these people what they could do to feel better, and now you're saying there's all these things that they shouldn't do. Come on,
No, I'm not
work
saying
with me.
No. I'm just saying there's all this static that keeps us
There
from getting
is.
the things that are really important and meaningful, or recognizing what's important or meaningful.
I would say at least once a day, sit down, take 15 minutes, and remember those times that you felt most alive that day, the past week, or the past month. Reflect upon that. What was going on at that time? What were you feeling? What was going on around you? What were the smells? What were the sounds? If there were tactile sensations, what were they? For those people who are gardeners and things, was it when you were, your hand in the soil? When were you feeling, and do that on a regular basis. Make that a grounding for yourself. Because you're right, there is all sorts of other stuff. But we don't want to let that, we don't want to give that the advantage. So we've got to strengthen ourselves up.
Yeah, and I think you're right in saying that in terms of our religion, there aren't things that are there that I'm just speaking about myself, that I don't utilize. Maybe because of all that interference, but to realize that they're there.
All right, how are people feeling? Let's check in.
Waiting for the next chapter. I've already started it. I'm going to be fascinated.
Awful.
Yes.
I'm enjoying reading this book. I like the way he writes and I like what he's writing. So.
Exactly. Yep.
Yeah, I recommended it to somebody today.
Yeah.
I'm feeling like I'm working hard on that inside. I'm working hard on the getting comfortable with myself first. And I have been for a long time. So maybe I've made some progress towards feeling comfortable sharing my spirituality with others.
Well, and again, to use a tool of our own tradition, it's the journey of Paul. Not that I've yet got there, and yet I journey onward. It's this perpetual journey, and if we're keeping up with it every day, we're getting closer and closer and closer. And then the other side of it is, I think, as we do this personal work, we find ourselves being pushed outward. I think it's just a natural happenstance. It's maybe we think that we're focusing on ourselves and we're ignoring the world. But I think if we're really focusing on that relationship, at least from our tradition, it forces us to be moving outward.
Yes.
Discipline.
Todd, your suggestion of taking a few minutes every day and thinking of what was a meaningful part of the day or the day before makes me think of your sermon the other week on gratitude. And I'd like to use that time to be grateful for those moments and acknowledge them, because they pass by and they're gone, and I don't even ever think of recovering them. And they're really, really important in this day and age with everything else that's going on or swirling around us. To center on
I
those
think
meaningful moments and be great. And I think for myself to respond to them with gratitude that they came to me, to kind of change my image of the external coming in.
I think one of the greatest lessons I learned from that, and keep Larry in your prayers because he's doing an important job of looking for one of the next directors at Oasis Ministry, because the retiring director Glenn kind of talked about developing strong spiritual disciplines so that we can learn to expand those moments. So that's not just a moment. It becomes more than a moment. And how do we learn to remain in those moments? And how do we learn to access so it's not a moment, it becomes a way of life? And that's really, what we're looking to do.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
He is a good example of that. There's no question. I was
How
thinking
are others
about that.
feeling?
I was thinking about that spiritual direction training that I went through and that you went through, and how that's helping, and how that is just one step towards sharing it with others.
What about others? How you doing?
Good. I'm with Joyce. I like the book. I like it's easy to read. Ginger read this chapter 3 on death, and she was kind of blown away by that a little bit.
Yeah, I particularly enjoyed chapter 3.
Death and hell.
Right.
Well, there's a plug for next week.
Yep.
Yes. It's a beautiful chapter.
Who's finished it?
I have.
If you finished the book, let me know. Okay. No, great, because I at first I was like, all right, I'll try and read the first chapter, like when I was just trying to get into it, and I was like, oh, I'm on chapter 4 now. So it's one of those things that even as you're reading it, it's almost like a spiritual discipline, and you just get sucked in. So it's perfectly fine if you've read it completely. Everything builds upon stuff, and it's to me it's fantastic. So no, that's great, and we will next week we'll focus on 3 again. If there's stuff that happens over the next week or things that percolate over things that we've read up to this point that you want to come back to, absolutely. And then we'll look at 3, and we'll go from there.
Okay. It talks about the game in chapter 3 called The Game of Life, the board game.
Yeah.
Oh my God.
I remember that game.
I remember it too. And I don't remember it that well, but
I remember spinning the dial and
yeah. Well,
I think one of the reasons why we enjoy this book, and I've kind of wondered, I think young people could enjoy it as much. His cultural references are for us.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Right.
Right.
So.
yeah,
All right.
I'm still thinking about Captain Kirk.
Well, they know Captain Kirk, but they certainly wouldn't know Kung Fu.
No.
Oh, yeah,
Although
go ahead.
Kung Fu got remade.
Yeah.
Oh, it did?
Yes,
And so
but it was a
did-
young woman.
And so did Captain
Oh,
Kirk.
it's a young woman. There you go.
It's a young woman. Yeah.
There's a new Star Trek too.
Yeah, there's several.
Listen, Grasshopper.
Yeah, I don't know if you can call him Grasshopper anymore. That might be a bad terminology. Who knows?
Who knows?
All right.
All right,
Folks, thanks again
Eagles
Thank
are up
you.
10-3.
Thank you.
Ginger will be back next week.
Good night.
Okay.
Good night, all.
I'll see folks tomorrow at Bible study. Take care.
Yes. Right.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Good
Bye
night.
bye.
Good night.